You can add shapes, arrows, and lines to charts and or to worksheets. You can begin by either clicking a chart, and on the Format tab in the ribbon, you'll see some choices off to the left under Insert Shapes. There's a drop arrow here. We see tons of options, basic shapes, block arrows, equations, flowcharts, and so on. Also some lines up at the top here. I'm going to click the arrow, single arrow, and simply drag it perhaps to the highest entry over there to the right. Line isn't too visible, but we see what happens. A contextual tab appears on the ribbon called Format. Here's some choices here. We could make it be thicker. I certainly would make it blue in the example, but black would turn up nicely there. There we are. Possibly we might want to connect this to the cell that actually is being reflected through. Domestic right there, something like that. We could do that. We can also, by choosing these lines, come back and choose some different effects here. Shape outline, shape effects. And we can come back and consider some other options over here too, different kinds of lines. A two-way arrow here and some angled arrows like this, or some rounded arrows and so on, different choices here. We might also consider adding basic shapes too. Maybe we'll connect this with, it doesn't have to be a rectangle necessarily, but we've got some other choices here. How about an octagon? And anytime you draw a shape, it possibly can hold text. When you're drawing shapes like this, they can be wide or tall, but if you want them to be perfect shapes, hold down the Shift key. Now, possibly you'll put some text in there or some other entry or some visual, maybe connect the two, something like that. Add the text later. You can simply start typing the text as you need it, or you can right-click, and sometimes you'll right-click a second time, edit text, and begin adding the text that way. If you need to draw a shape, you don't necessarily have to even select the chart. You can go back to the Insert tab and get to those same options by this tiny little button right here called Shapes. Same choices we saw before. And two other mentions here of items that you sometimes need to draw. If you want to draw a circle, you'll draw an oval. If you want to draw a square, you'll draw a rectangle. But in either case, you'll need to hold down the Shift key. So suppose I want a circle on here that I'm going to put some text in. I'll click the oval and then click and drag. Now, of course, it could be an oval, wide one or a tall one. But as I hold down the Shift key, I can make this as large or small as I want. But if I let go of the mouse first, this will be a perfect circle. And similarly with a rectangle, you want it to be a square. Sometimes you'll see the icon already here. If a shape is selected, here's a rectangle. I'll click and drag. Could be a rectangle, of course, but holding down Shift will get a square. So we can add text. We can connect these with different arrows. We can easily add these, sometimes for worksheet annotation, sometimes for just a quick visual. Remember, we can move these around too. Simply click the shape, drag it around here. Possibly we'll change the color of that. Here's the arrow. I'm going to drag the end of that, put it right there. There's also an option here to make sure that it's behind the image if it's not already. Got to bring forward, send backward, and so on. Some other choices here. So we can add text to these. We can put them in the worksheet itself or in the chart, or actually overlapping the two if we wish. So all kinds of variations here. And of course, if you don't have design skills or that instinct, perhaps these might not always look so great, but you certainly have the option of adding these features to charts and worksheets as you work with Excel.